great crowd, so welcome. And is that right? Louder? More louder, okay. So first of all, just to, you can see that I came from a very segregated background, so it might be interesting to sort of see why I actually started in this field, and it was fundamentally through working with parents. So that's a very important starting point. The first point, computers never work, do they? Okay. First thing is, what do we mean by inclusion? It's really important, this, because I've heard about special schools which are inclusive special schools, and I've just never understood that, how that could mean. What we mean is, yeah.
Stand back a bit, please.
Up there, okay. Okay. Means physically included the same as all the other children. So in other words, not being pulled out for special classes or whatever, it's in the same amount as all the other children. It means socially belonging, not just in the classroom and isolated, but actually socially belonging with networks with the other children. It means including the same curriculum material as the other children. If the other children are doing statistics, the child with disability should be doing statistics. That's a bit of a challenge, as you can imagine. And the final thing is included in the school and class rules. If you're not included in the school and class rules, you're actually not included, are you? Because you're seen as being someone different. Now, it might take you longer to get the child there, but it's still an incredibly important thing. So if you think about that definition, it applies to all children, not just children with disability. And that's the important thing. And I don't think an inclusive definition means anything unless it applies to all children. It's not inclusive. Now, I just want you to say, why are we doing this sort of stuff? And fundamentally, every parent I ever talk to of a child with disability, if they could have that life for their child, they would want it. For their child to go to regular school, go to TAFE, university or whatever, and home, family, regular job, all those things. Now, I've never met a parent who wouldn't choose that if they could get it. But what's the vision that parents are presented with? But what we'll do is we'll go for early intervention, a segregated early intervention program. Then we'll go to a segregated primary school. Then we'll go to a segregated high school. Then we'll go to a segregated TAFE course. Then we go to post-school options, etc., etc., etc. Now just think of the logic of that. We're going to take children who are developmentally delayed, put them with other children who are developmentally delayed, so all the models are lousy. We're going to do this for the whole of the developmental period in order to teach them how to be included. Some problems for that, isn't there? So fundamentally, the argument here is if we keep the kids on the top line, then they're more likely to get that top life. But if we put them on the bottom line, the chances of getting that bottom life is much, much higher than getting the top life. Now, why do we want to do this? The first thing to realise is this is not an educational issue, it's a moral issue. Inclusion is about the morality of excluding kids, any particular group of kids. Now, we used to do it to girls, didn't we? Girls previously weren't allowed to go to education, and then they went when they were. The girls did home science and boys did science. We've moved on from there. We used to deny Aboriginal kids education. We've moved on from there. This is the only group of kids who's actually still segregated. And that's a moral decision of our society that that's okay to do that against the wishes of the parents. It's okay if parents want to choose segregation, that's a totally different issue, and to being forced to it either by making their life so miserable they choose segregation, which is a very common sort of situation, or actually being blocked. Why should we do it? Just a very quick sort of overview. It's the right thing to do. That's in terms of morally. I think it's fixing with our fair go situation. Think of the values to be taught. How many of you want your children to learn the values on the left-hand side? That's sort of where you want to go. If we include children well, are these the values we're going to teach the other kids? So we're actually teaching a whole generation of kids coming up that if they share the classroom well with these kids, these are the values we're teaching. On the other hand, if we reject those children, are we in fact values on the right? The very antithesis of those values. We've also just talked there about the long-term outcomes. It's pretty obvious. We've now had 150 years or whatever it was of segregated education. Has it worked? Do people get a normal life? Now, if it hasn't worked in 150 years, why is it going to work next week? On the other hand, what do we know that's coming out of the research is if people are included right through high school and as we're doing now into university, then in fact their life can actually change. Well, what's the research say? Because this is quite an important thing that when I went through university, the basic assumption was that lots of kids were best off segregated. That's a fairly common view. So let's have a look at what the research says. Look at the year there, 1965. That's the first article that I've actually come up with. And that's where a university set up an ideal special education class and compared it to kids who were left in the normal classroom. The kids in the normal classroom did better than their university designed special education class. 1965. The first review I could come up with is 1968, going back to 1930s. Students with mild mental handicaps made as much or more progress than in regular class, and they didn't segregate. Why only kids with mild handicaps? Anyone know that?
Because the others weren't at school at all.
The others to go to school.
Ineducable.
Ineducable. So in other words, there wasn't actually, I'm sure the same thing. In WA it was in 1979, up to 1979, if your child had an IQ below 50, they were deemed to be ineducable. They were not allowed to go to school under the Education Act, and it was responsible for parents to actually teach them. 1979, that's not long ago. Not for me. This is a major study, very highly cited. This is where they review lots of research and put it together and statistically analyse it. Special class placement is significantly inferior to regular class placements because students were below average IQ. And not only that, but children who were segregated lost percentile ranks. In other words, they went backwards in relation to their peers. Well, it doesn't mean they went backwards actually, but it just meant that because they were going ahead slower, they actually went backwards in relation to their friends who were included. This is just another one, but it's more the next thing. And basically saying, and this is a common thing going through, it's not only inclusion, but you also need to have some specific attention to those children in the classroom. But I want to just show you what I mean by some Calhoun and Elliott's, which was mentioned in the article. The dotted line there is the children who are so totally segregated. The solid lines are a matched group of children who were included. Now you can see the dotted line goes up. Segregated education works. There's nothing, no one's saying that this is, special schools don't work. They do, just inclusion works better. This is now looking at children with very severe disabilities. And now this is over 14 school systems, which is a massive study. And what they found is the degree that the child was included reflected how well the child did. A child that was included 100% of the time did better than a child that was included 20% of the time or 50% of the time. So the more you included, the better your results were, regardless of how disabled you were. This also applies to children with multiple disabilities. So in other words, not just the child with a mild disability. What's the costs? Now, numerous studies now showing the cost is not greater. It doesn't cost any more to have an inclusive situation. What happens though is there's huge resources tied up in the special education system. If you move to an inclusive system, it doesn't actually cost any more. There is of course a transition cost while you're running both systems together. What about friendships? This is a key thing. Is my child going to get picked on? All of those sorts of things. This is an Israeli study where it wasn't even the children fully included, it was children who were totally segregated versus children who were in a unit in a regular school versus the mainstream children. And as you can see there, that the children who were totally segregated had fewer friends and felt lonelier. If you look at the actual data from that study, the top line there is how many children reported having no friends. I find that data pretty scary, that 1 in 20 children is reporting having no friends. This is regular kids as well as kids with disability. Don't you find that scary? I find that pretty scary. If you look at one friend, 60% of the kids in special school reported only having one friend. And they met that friend at school only. Why? Because they were being bused across town. They didn't go to school with their neighbours. When you look at 2 to 4 friends, there's a rate. But actually, the kids with a disability in the regular school were reported as having more friends than even the mainstream kids.